This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
You're listening to Building the Broncos with Nick Kendell and Carl Dumler, Broncos Country's leading draft and scouting analysts. Get on over to milehighhuddle.com to sound off on all things Broncos.
Hello there, Broncos Country, and it is once again time for another episode of Building the Broncos. I am your host, Carl Dumler, and with me, as always, I have my co-host and good friend, Mr. Nick Kendell, and we are joined by special guest, Joe Goodberry. Gentlemen, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing fantastic, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. Before you got on here, you said you're from Buffalo, but I was just complaining about the weather, which honestly I feel like that's a theme in the podcast. Every winter when we're getting draft season, I'm complaining about Iowa winters, and Carl knows that too, and you live in Buffalo, so you get the winter as well, but you especially get the heavy snow. So, yeah, we're really excited to have you on today. We'll get to you in a second about going to talk some more quarterbacks. I know you're down in the Senior Bowl and everything like that, but we'll let Carl take away the intro first.
Yeah, we want to make sure that all of our listeners can find us on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @CarlDumlerMHH, and of course we have Nick @NickKendellMHH, and you can follow the podcast Twitter account @HuddleUpPod. Make sure you subscribe to our show and leave us a rating, as we value your input on the show. You can find the show on iTunes, Stitcher, and even that of YouTube. Also, make sure you head over to Mile High Huddle, an affiliate of 24/7 Sports and the CBS Sports Digital Network, to find ours and our co-writers' articles and all things pertaining to your Denver Broncos. This podcast is powered by Overtime Media. Well, like we said, we have a special guest of Joe Goodberry, and for those who do not know, he writes for The Athletic. And he is big into his football analysis when it comes to the draft. And unfortunately, he's not quite the Broncos, but he is the Cincinnati Bengals. And I can't believe this is – I know this is a little bit off of our topic here, but, man, new coach, how does that feel?
I have no idea how this feels and how it's supposed to feel, to be honest. Since I was 16 years old, I've had Marvin Lewis. I never thought this day would come. And then now that it's here, it is one of the – maybe the first or last unknown territory that I've felt in being a writer and analyst for the Bengals.
Yeah, and congratulations on avoiding Hugh Jackson and Vance Joseph.
Oh, man.
Yeah, I have a friend who's a large Bengals fan, and he actually referenced your work a few times, but he was freaking out about potentially Hugh Jackson or Vance Joseph and cursing the owner's name a few times. So glad that he could be happy and glad you could be happy as well. I'd be excited about Zach Taylor. Yeah,
we're hopeful. I mean, what can you really expect from these coaches that are, plucked at such a young age, and they really don't have the extensive background that some of these guys that are 45, 50, 55 even are. So you're just hoping they brought in, good candidates, and Zach Taylor won the job. If that's the case, then yeah, we're excited.
And then Denver, you guys go right, following the trend of many teams in the NFL, and Denver goes hard left. Vic Fangio, the older candidate, defensive-minded. So we'll see how it works out in the end. But moving along here, yeah, thank you for coming on today. Like Carl said, you're a big Bengals fan, and I was just curious about what brought you to the Bengals. You said you're from Buffalo. Are you originally from the Cincinnati area, or you're a big fan of a player growing up? I went to actually the same college as Bengals former quarterback Ken Anderson, so I've actually have a little bit of Bengal ties there at Augustana College in Rock Island. So he's been around a few times there. But I'm curious about what brought you to becoming a big draft analyst and a Bengals fan.
Yeah, I'm not from Ohio. Never lived there. I've always lived outside the Buffalo area. Besides being born in Florida, my family moved up here when I was about 1 or so, and so Western New York's all I've ever known. And I don't know what stuck in my brain or in my heart to follow the Bengals. I do remember as a young child, I probably was 2, and I remember the Bengals helmets. But you know how you think back and you say, I have this memory, but I don't know if it happened when I was 2 or if I remember it when I was 5. I used to watch the NFL films all the time growing up, and just their production and everything they did really had an imprint on me when I was a young kid. And I remember the Bengals running out of the tunnel to play the 49ers in 1989. And I don't know if I actually remember that as being a 2-year-old, but I may have rewatched it at 6 or 7 or whatever, and it just grabbed hold of me. And being in Buffalo, all my family are Buffalo Bills fans. And in 89, the Bengals and Bills played in a playoff game, and the Bengals were running this up-tempo, no-huddle offense. And the Bills were getting frustrated and started faking some injuries during the game. Anyways, the Bengals win and go on and play in the Super Bowl, obviously. But from that sparked a little bit of a rivalry between these two teams that really goes unnoticed largely around the league. But the Bills come back and they go to 4 straight Super Bowls behind Jim Kelly and the K-Gun offense, where they're running this no-huddle, fast-paced offense that they got from the Bengals in that loss. And it kind of grew from there. And if you ever watch America's Team, The Missing Rings, where they talk about the best teams that lost, both teams reference that playoff game. And I think that had an impact on me also as a young kid, knowing that my older brother liked the Bills and here's the Bengals playing against them. And, like I said, I was young, but I think it did have an impact on me.
Well, awesome. As Carl and I are also transplants of, not local, covering this team, we definitely feel you there. And also I'm curious, maybe it's just because a Bengals fan, being behind the Ravens and the Steelers, no offense, kind of gravitated you towards the NFL draft and analysis that comes with that.
I was going to say that when you talked about the cold weather. I think northern, cold, Rust Belt, and losing cities gravitate to the draft. Well, what else are you doing in January, February, and March? If you're not out playing sports unless you're playing basketball in a gym somewhere, but so you're watching and you're developing that other part of the game. It's not the physical part. It's the mental. It's the repetitions. It's really what got me into football, honestly. Playing Madden as a young kid and Mel Kiper seemed like a superstar for these 3 months of the year made me want to learn more about the draft and team building and what makes each player different and what makes them successful or not. And, I think I find a lot of Browns, Bills, Bengals, all the way up to Jets and Giants and everyone from around this area that really hasn't had this sustained success for a long time and yet nothing to do in the winter months. I believe those guys make a lot of good draft analysts.
Well, there you go. Luckily for at least myself, it kind of got turned on after the Broncos stunk under Josh McDaniels and fortunately chose to pick Von Miller instead of actually the guy that I was leaning towards at the time was Patrick Peterson. I was young and stupid at the time. Yeah, that was an amazing draft.
If you took a quarterback, that's the only way you missed.
Yeah, except Cam Newton, but that was pretty much the only way. Maybe Aldon Smith too in hindsight, but that was not because of talent.
Right, he was fantastic on the field.
Yeah, crazy. But now, we got to lean into this a little bit. Good transition here. You're talking about quarterbacks, that 2011 draft, and I wouldn't say that this draft has the top talent that the 2011 draft has, although there is some insane talent at defensive line and edge rusher. But in Denver, it's going to be the case until it's not the case. Quarterback talk is surrounding the city, the fan base, the organization, et cetera, et cetera. And a Roto World ran with it yesterday, although people in Denver have been saying it for months now, Ben Albright, Woody Page, et cetera, that the Denver Broncos and John Elway are very much intrigued, potentially infatuated with one Drew Lock. And this is why we have you on here. We're curious to have your takes. I did get a chance to read your Athletic article on him, so I kind of have a little bit of an understanding of where you're at on Drew Lock, but I'm curious about how it's changed since you have visited him, seen him in Mobile, seen the 2 practices instead of 3, unfortunately, but just curious about your overall thoughts on Drew Lock.
And before we get into that, let's make sure we use the right word, smitten.
Smitten.
Elway is smitten with him.
There we go.
Right. And that was the talk during Senior Bowl week, too, from a lot of people. Not only are you there watching practices, but everyone's going out at night or having dinner together, and everyone's talking, and what do you hear and what do you see? And, who'd you talk to over there? What's that guy? And what's he got to say? So a lot of gossip going on, and that was a topic that routinely came up, is that the Broncos and Elway really liked the idea of Drew Lock. And when I watched him before going down there, and I had some questions that I wanted to see if maybe he could try to answer. And I don't mean verbally asking him questions, even though I did get that opportunity. And speaking of, I thought his personality was very good, fantastic. He could recall a lot of specific situations and plays, and he was very aware of what his strengths and weaknesses are, which I think is a good thing. And he was very honest and open about it. I think he's going to crush interviews, and probably already did with the Broncos if Elway is smitten with him. So that was a good first step for him. First day during media day was to just be as personable as he was. And then going into practice, this is what I saw on tape. I saw a guy with an A-plus arm talent, and I think everybody would agree with that. But at the same time, maybe trusted it too much and really lived off of that arm. I feel like there are too many examples of him trying to fit a ball into an area that he probably shouldn't, and maybe should go through his progressions or look to take off and run or move in the pocket and buy time. Instead, while his arm is extremely strong, I think his deep accuracy had issues at times, and most of it was trajectory and ball placement, which I think comes with the territory of those type of guys. I'm thinking of like the Jay Cutler, Matt Stafford type of quarterbacks that will, they live off that arm talent. And we say this about running quarterbacks too, and it's kind of has the same dilemma. When you have an athletic trait that you can lean on and win by without using all the tools in the toolbox, I think it becomes a crutch. And while it can be your greatest strength, it can also become your greatest weakness. And a lot of times I saw that with Locke, where he just trusted it and he went with it. And you know what? It created a lot of plays and a lot of upside plays. You'll see it with Patrick Mahomes, where, yes, he'll create a little more with his legs and feet than Locke will and feel a little more comfortable outside of the structure of the offense when he gets off schedule. I think Mahomes looks much more comfortable. But when you're rolling or moving and you got to place that ball into that second and third level with pinpoint accuracy between defenders, Locke did that and could do that and will do it and is willing to do it. That's something I was grading on heavily for this class is not only do they have the arm strength, are they willing to push the ball into tight windows? Because right now I'm watching the Bengals, Andy Dalton does not do that. He doesn't have the greatest arm, but he's also not willing to test it. And Locke, Drew Locke will do that. So it is important. And so starting with that and that physical trait, I think you're starting in a good point. I'd rather reel a guy in than try and unlock somebody. And with Locke, you're definitely going to have to reel him in a little bit on some of these. I think the biggest flaw for me and the scariest thing for me when watching him was how he dealt with pressure and the decisions he made on third downs when he was pressured. There's a couple games where it's just one after the next. I want to say Purdue game, he tallied a lot of yards and touchdowns, and I think they won at the end because he made a nice play. But there was a couple third downs in like the third, early fourth quarter where he lost his mind a little bit, and he gets pressured, and he wants to make something happen really bad. And I think this happens in the Alabama game too. He throws a bad interception on the left side where he just puts it up, and it's third down again, and he gets pressure in his face, and he just lays it up there. I mean, you're directly taking 3 points off the game by not allowing your team to kick the field goal. But at the same time, I like the aggressive mindset of, I need to make this play. Touchdowns are worth way more than field goals, and I need to push this ball into the end zone. It didn't work out for him there, and a lot of them do not work out. I think most of his bad plays directly come from poor decision-making once he's pressured. And that's scary because I think most of the busted quarterbacks over the last, 5 to 10 years, when you go back and look at them, you say, yeah, they really didn't deal with pressure very well. And that's something you have to do in the NFL. You have to remain cool. You got to be able to navigate the pocket, work well when bodies are around your feet, and be able to maintain a strong arm and accuracy when your feet can't be set or when you have to move from your mark, your original launch point. And when you can do that and remain accurate, that's when you have a really good quarterback. And so Locke has the tools I want, but there are some natural traits that I think are very hard to trying to mold somebody out of being weird when the pocket breaks down is very hard. I'd rather have a guy that maybe didn't have the arm strength or didn't want or ability to push it downfield, but was calm and cool in the pocket. And I'm thinking, obviously Tom Brady, Drew Brees, that's them. They can move within the pocket without having crazy arms, and they have great accuracy, obviously, and they're 9 out of 10 on everything besides having a cannon for an arm. But It doesn't mean that Locke doesn't get there. And out of the top guys, and this even go before Dwayne Haskins, I am most interested in Locke and where he ends up in 2, 3, 4 years.
Yeah, I would argue that unless you're considering the overall package of Kyler Murray with the athleticism, then I think Locke probably has some of the highest upside as far as total package in this class. But that comes with a tremendously low floor as well. So it's going to be very interesting to watch.
Well, and Bronco fans have a little PTSD from the Paxton Lynch days, a big arm quarterback that looked like he could do about anything, high ceiling, and then nothing came of it.
Yeah, but I got to say there's just as many of us, me included, that have PTSD of what Joe is talking about here, of a quarterback that the arm is limited enough that it means they are not taking those shots vertically down the field, from Peyton Manning's last year and a quarter to Trevor Siemian for 2 years, Kyle Orton, even Case Keenum. I mean, the arm talent and the ability to push the ball vertically is something that at least really intrigues me. And I understand that there's obviously fatal flaws with Locke, and maybe it's because he's been so heavily linked with Denver, but I definitely feel myself starting to talk myself into him at 10, but that's with the understanding that there's huge risk in taking him at 10, and he might need a year to sit when it's all said and done to work on some of these traits and the mental processing of the game and just really work on resetting those feet. That's something that just needs to be hammered in there.
If I can, I was going to add one thing, and I don't know if we're going to talk about Will Grier at all, but Will Grier and Drew Lock are very similar in their mindset and how they react to pressure and how they are willing to throw downfield and push the ball. But Locke versus Grier in their arm strength and talent are on the other side of the spectrum, in my opinion. And that's the difference between why a guy is considered at number 10. And because of he's never going to be Case Keenum or Trevor Siemian. He's going to be more than that if he can play to the same consistency. Whereas Will Grier, if he plays to that consistency, he's at best Case Keenum. And I think that's why the discussion will be focused on Locke rather than a guy like Grier. And I just use him because I think they're very similar in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I cannot disagree. And Will Grier, watching him Senior Bowl practices, even in the game, he looked like the Case Keenum that was pressing. That once he was like, oh, we actually need to make some plays down the field. Oh, well, I don't have the arm to make that throw, or I'm not resetting my feet, et cetera, et cetera. So I really agree 100% with your take there. And I'm curious. So the last thing I want to ask here is that Drew Lock, would you sit him for a year or half the season? And why would you be looking to do that? And why would it be worth having Bronco fans? You'll speak to the Bronco fans here, why that would be worth the patience to give him a year.
I think it's always a case-by-case basis. I'm not one to say you should always sit a guy or you should always play a guy. I think there's enough examples of guys sitting where I could use that and say, yeah, that's probably a good idea, especially if someone has a fatal flaw or something you're trying to fix, whether that be the throwing motion or their pocket presence and comfort in the pocket. And I think those type of things, if you're out there taking live shots or live reps, you revert back to your natural form. But if you can sit for a year, maybe even 2 years, and I'm not saying this is even feasible in 2019 NFL, but if you can do that without taking live shots and feeling actual pressure like you're going to get hit, you can work on the things you need to fix. And by doing so, when you come back out of it, now you've rewritten your code in your DNA. And this is just my theory on it. And then you come out like an Aaron Rodgers, let's say, or a Tyrod Taylor. Those guys that were able to sit come out and they look like completely different players, in my opinion. But when you're forced in or thrusted in too soon, you need to live off what your talent is. And I think that's what when you see or will see a Drew Lock turn into what he is, and that's an okay player that's considered a top 15 pick right at this point. But that's how you limit maybe the things he could fix and grow and reach a new level. Patrick Mahomes, great example, honestly, because he had a lot of these issues coming out of Texas Tech. Now, I think he showed more high-end ability when things went off script than Locke does, but that's not to say he didn't have a lot of negative and weird plays when he was pressured, fading away or trying to force a ball that wasn't there. And he got to sit for 15 games and then play one game and really study that tape for the whole offseason to come out, probably the MVP of the league this year. So that's an ideal scenario. Not everyone has that, but if you're talking Broncos, you could go with Case Keenum for another year unless they want to bring in a different veteran and lead the way. I think a lot of it comes down to also is mental capability. They from reports, right? Paxton Lynch never really had that and never wanted it, right? He never wanted to really dive in and be that part and do that part. I get the feeling Locke does, and he wants it. So he may prove that, mentally I can handle this. And I think that's like, if you look at Buffalo's situation, they wanted to sit Josh Allen for as long as possible. Turns out the guys they brought in didn't work out. Nathan Peterman was terrible, and they traded away A.J. McCarron. So they're left with, all right, well, at least we know mentally Josh can handle this, and we're going to put him in and maybe hold him back a little bit, but we know he can handle it from a mental standpoint. I think so. If you draft a quarterback, that's first and foremost. Can he handle it if he has to play right away? If not, and that's probably a question until you get him in there and see him in camp. And I think that's a lot of times you bring a guy in, you're like, well, surprisingly, this guy is eating it up and we can give him as much as possible. He may be our starter. And you're not worried so much about the little things, the little mechanical things that you got to fix, because I believe a lot of coaches believe they can do that. I don't know. I guess that long-winded answer is I don't know for Locke. It would depend on where he goes. I think going to Denver with Keenum in front of him will help and provide him some time to work on those things.
Well, awesome. You're definitely making me feel a little bit better because that does sound like the direction that Denver would go if they brought in Locke. Maybe it might be an 8 games kind of thing, but I don't think he would be thrust exactly into the starting situation, and that might be best for Locke. But moving along now, another guy that wanted to spend most of the time on Locke because he's the guy who's been most heavily linked to Denver, but a guy that I'll admit there's been some round one talk, and even before the Senior Bowl, I wouldn't say vehemently against it, but I watched the tape and I understand he was coming off a collarbone injury, but I just did not see round one tools. I saw a guy with a limited arm talent, a guy that had I couldn't believe how many open reads he had over the middle of the field. Granted, Brady did it against the Chargers, so I guess it is translatable to sometimes in the NFL.
Yeah.
But that's Daniel Jones, and a guy that really didn't stand out to me in the Senior Bowl. He took what the defense gave him, he moved the offense, but I didn't see – there's no real trait to hang your hat on. I'm curious about your thoughts on Jones.
I felt more comfortable about Jones when I started watching quarterbacks. And, I start by usually skimming over the top guys, and then I'll dig into the one guy I find the most intriguing. And for me, that was Jones. And I found him most intriguing because it was hard to pinpoint exactly what he was good at and what his weaknesses were. Do you know what I mean? He's a big guy, so you expect a strong arm. And that's probably a misnomer, right? We shouldn't do that still in 2018, or 19 now. But you watch him and you say, okay, he's got good deep ball accuracy, but he doesn't have a cannon. He's not really rifling it in there. I wouldn't be surprised if his velocity numbers were low. So as I'm watching more and more, I'm now watching the offense, and all their vertical stuff is like 4 verts and simplistic stuff. And you see he takes a lot of sacks because of it. But also they got a lot of RPOs, and middle of the field is open, and he hits those slants with great anticipation and touch. And I go, okay, that's good. You want that. He's running the offense the way they're designing it, and he looks okay for the most part. And I don't think he got a lot of help from his outside receivers. There was a lot of drops on deep balls that I thought should have connected. And then there's times where I'm watching him, and he's forcing things that I don't know what he's seeing or what he's looking at and throwing it directly into coverage, or he's holding the football too long without feeling the rush. He had a lot of sack fumbles by it being hit on the backside, never feeling it. I believe he had 12 batted passes. I got to ask him that at the Senior Bowl, and he was very robotic in his answers during media day. Very prepared, very ready, but very monotone and flat line, much like an Eli Manning, which some people may enjoy. But when I asked him about his 12 batted balls, he wiggled in his seat. He didn't have an answer. He wasn't prepared for that. And I was hoping to get an answer of, well, I got to get my release point a little bit higher. I got to move within the pocket and find a better throwing lane. Instead, he stammered about it a little bit and said he's got to do a better job, basically. So I found that interesting that he was maybe unaware or didn't have an answer for why he was having these batted passes. A guy who's 6'5" shouldn't have that many batted balls, but you do see he throws with 3/4 release a lot. And Drew Lock will too, and he had a lot of batted balls too. But at the same time, I felt like Locke would move and find a passing lane better than Jones would. So I still come away with Jones. And after watching Senior Bowl practices, I thought he looked very flustered. He fumbled, I want to say, 3 snaps from under center in 2 days that we watched. Then he took 3 shotgun snaps to the face and fumbled them on the last day. I mean, not only should you not be fumbling the ball anymore on the last day, you shouldn't be taking shotgun snaps like that, like you haven't done that in your whole career. With both he and Locke, their production scores are going to be low from the analytical standpoint, where they're just baseline starters, and it doesn't suggest they're Pro Bowlers or all-pro guys. So I wanted to, when looking at both of them, because I think it applies, I wanted to see, okay, so that's the analytics. If they're going to be an outlier and become something more, why are they going to become something more? What traits are they going to be able to lean on that maybe aren't quantifiable? And I thought Jones was better outside of the structure of the offense with decision-making, with rolling out and throwing, with being off base, maybe getting off of his platform or original launch point more often. So I on tape, I like Jones as maybe a first-rounder, but only because the value gets pushed up there. I don't think that I would sit here and say, I have a franchise label on that guy, or I believe he's a top, quarterback prospect. I think he's like a Christian Ponder. And you mentioned the 2011 draft when we started this, and there's some similarities here. I think the Cam Newton is 5'9" in Kyler Murray. I think the Jake Locker could be Drew Lock, and you guys may not want to hear that, but, thinking of how they're built and how they react could be very similar. Jake Locker could roll the dice again and be a good player. He could be a Patrick Mahomes in an Andy Reid offense, right? So it's just saying as a prospect, and I come away with Daniel Jones and saying Christian Ponder because I think teams are going to talk themselves into feeling very comfortable with a prospect like that, a guy who seems very clean and smart, but very, very cool and calm as a personality wise. And I think teams are going to like it, and they're going to see a big guy and think strong arm, even though I don't think it's that. If I were to rank the guys, Locke and Kyler Murray have the strongest arms, no doubt. I think Haskins has a stronger arm, even though he's not as accurate deep as Jones is. I mean, the next group of guys, I think he's got a better arm than Greer. But if Tyree Jackson is in the next group, I think he's got a much worse arm than Tyree Jackson, obviously. So Jones is at the bottom of the pile in terms of arm strength, even though he's a bigger guy. But he can move. You watch the North Carolina game, and he runs for 186 yards. And you go, where does that come from? And I think some teams are going to use that and say, okay, we can do some things with him. And maybe it's more of a Joe Flacco, where Flacco, his rookie year, could move. But as it progressed, you could see that moving him more and more actually limited him, and because he wasn't a great passer when his feet were off the ground or on the move. So Jones remains interesting to me. I think at the very best upside, maybe he's Matt Ryan. And I think that's such a small percentage that actually hits that. But I think that's what teams are probably hoping for.
So when I watch him, I can't help but think his upside would be maybe a Ryan Tannehill type that can move around a little bit. It's, solid underneath accuracy, can hit the deep ball when needed, but I just don't see that juice, and that's something that wears me off. And another guy is maybe even a Brock Osweiler, bringing it back to the Broncos, where Brock Osweiler was a pretty good athlete. Another guy that received some basketball scholarship offers, and a tall guy, but didn't have that arm that you'd associate with being that tall of a guy, and that limited him. So I think Daniel Jones is very safe, but first round, I can't get behind the traits.
Well,
and I think I was just going to say, and if you don't put a franchise grade on these guys or think they can be a franchise quarterback, if you don't think they're going to become a really, really good player, don't draft them in the first round, right? Isn't there like a cutoff point you guys think, like, I don't want to take a guy just because he seems all right. I want to either be convinced or not.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I'm with you. How much do you factor in, because this always gets brought up with Daniel Jones, that his coach was David Cutcliffe? Because that just always seems to be he was coached by the Manning coach, and that means he's going to be ready for the NFL. I always think that gets overblown. At least that's my opinion.
I think coaching a lot of times is a factor in evaluation because, yes, you want somebody to come in and be more ready and able to play right away. But I also think that probably limits their upside. If you're looking at a guy and you say he was well coached, well, that means he should probably be near his ceiling, right? And with Jones, you feel that way in a lot of his plays and a lot of his film. You're like, yeah, that's his physical max. And then, seeing him at the weigh-in, though, he looked like an average guy. I mean, body type wise, he could really pack it on and add some muscle and some strength. He wasn't quite Tom Brady in those pictures from the combine, but I was surprised to see that physically he was not maxed out. And for a guy who's dealt with injuries, ankles, collarbone, and so on, he's had more. Maybe that's limited him some. So maybe there's some physical upside with him. But if they're saying he's coached that well, and then from the Manning Academy, mental upside isn't there because he's already reached that peak, then I have some concerns because I have a lot of questions about his mental decisions also.
Yeah, and moving it along here because we still got some other guys we want to get to, but you mentioned that Cam Newton is this. If it was 2011, Cam Newton is the Kyler Murray, or Kyler Murray is the Cam Newton for this upcoming class. And I'll be honest, I have not dug in as deep on Kyler Murray as other quarterbacks. I, for one, wasn't sure for a long time if he was going to go join the combine. I mean, still not sure. I'm curious to see if he's going to show up for the spring training. That still could happen for the
February 12th, right?
Yep, February 12th. So it's coming up, but still waiting to be seen. And also, from everything I've heard, he's not a guy that John Elway is likely to take a swing on in the first round. Just, maybe John Elway's a little bit too old school thinking, but it is what it is. And maybe he's throwing a smoke signal out there. I mean, but the Broncos have shown over the past few years that they're not really ones to keep their cards close to their chest, at least for the media. So, yeah, I'm curious about your take on Kyler Murray, and I know that you are a big fan of his game.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be a divide between the old school teams and maybe the more, I don't want to say progressive, but the teams that are willing to risk it a little bit and try something new. Maybe they have experience with a smaller quarterback or running quarterbacks. I should say athletic quarterbacks, because he is very much a passer. And Murray, he may be 5'9", 185, and that's going to be his biggest concern, because you're going to question durability, taking hits, and obviously seeing over the line and through the line. But when you watch the tape, he rarely gets hit. He is elusive. He toys with defenders a lot of times while running, while even moving within the pocket, or when he breaks the pocket and runs downfield. He runs out of bounds. He slides very well, obviously a baseball player. He doesn't take those direct shots very often. And then seeing over the line, he's got a big, good offensive line at Oklahoma. I mean, there were two guards at the Senior Bowl, two tall guys, and he moves within the pocket and finds throwing lanes is probably better than any prospect in this draft, because he needs to. And I think, like we talked about, guys with big arms or that can run develop a crutch on that. He's developed the need to move within the pocket to find throwing lanes, much like a Russell Wilson and Drew Brees do. I mean, those two guys are two of the best, and it's no surprise they're short guys. And so it becomes a necessity to do that. And Murray definitely flashes that, even with 1 year starting. And that's going to be another question also, because I think the old school teams want to see 2 years, I think, in today's league, because guys get rushed through. But typically they want 3 years of starting experience. So you've got some games with Texas Tech for Kyler Murray, and then you have just this 1 year in a good system that we know works. For Lincoln Riley's system. That was a question I had with Baker Mayfield coming out too. I thought, well, geez, if you don't give him a really good system, there's a chance he's going to a worse offensive system in the NFL than he had in college. I mean, that's a fair chance that was going to happen. I think they found a good match with Freddie Kitchens and things really exploded for them. But that's not always going to happen if Kyler Murray goes somewhere that isn't forward thinking. And that's why I believe those teams will have a whole different view on Murray than the conservative or old school. I don't believe the Giants will be very high on him. I wonder if the Jaguars will be very high on Murray. I think those teams, and you mentioned the Broncos, may want more of a traditional pocket passer, even if they do realize that mobility is a growing trait in football. So with Murray, I think he's got A+ arm talent. I mean, flick of the wrist, Mike Vick type stuff, where he doesn't have to be perfectly set, and he can rocket a ball 60 yards in the air. I think the Alabama game shows he breaks the pocket, makes a guy miss, and just launches the ball extremely early after moving the safety with his eyes and throws a deep 60-yard bomb down the middle of the field for a touchdown. That stuff was very routine when watching him, and he didn't get flustered in the pocket. I thought he moved very well, kept his eyes up very well. The issues I had with him are more of anticipation, which I think comes with reps and time and timing. As a 1 year starter, those are going to be issues. And I also think sometimes he dealt with inaccuracy issues in the short range. I think intermediate, over the middle, deep, he was good as anybody. But there were some routine stuff where it should just be a quick dump off to your running back, and if you hit him in stride and out front, you're going to gain 8 yards. Instead, it's low and it's away, or the running back's got to adjust and can't stay up to speed, and ends up being a 2-yard gain. So there's some out routes where he should just hit it, and the guy maybe even gets some yards after the catch, and he throws it too low, and the guy's going to the ground and only getting 7 yards on 3rd and 8. There were those issues where it was just routine things that you hope can get cleared up because he flashes enough that accuracy isn't an issue with him. Arm strength isn't an issue. You want to say it's repetition. I mean, there are times where he threw some interceptions where he threw it right to the defender, and I say, well, is that vision? Is that not understanding your offense? Is it not having the timing down? So there are questions, and that's the hardest part with 1 year starters. I'm going to have the same questions and the same kind of holding back when I watch Dwayne Haskins, talk about Dwayne Haskins too, because 1 year starters, here's the tape, here's the film. It could be good, it could be bad, whatever trait you're looking at. I want to know, does he get better at it? I want to know if defenses start focusing on it in year 2. I want to know if it develops in year 2, year 3, and we won't get that opportunity with these two quarterbacks, with Murray and Haskins. And because of that, and the NFL draft is a cloudy exercise as it is. Drafting a guy with 1 year starting experience at that position makes it even harder to project if that's going to be a fixable issue, because I think that's what I watch for. When I watch, I say, okay, I'm looking for the trend. So I start writing down, okay, he had to scramble and couldn't find the second read. And then if I write that down 5 times over the next 3 games, I'm like, okay, that's a trend. That is something in his game that continues to happen, and I'll go back and focus on those plays to find out exactly what happened. But if you don't have another year to see how he progresses or how defenses force him into his bad plays, because that's what will happen, especially in the NFL, you really don't get an idea of what his true upside is. Now, the production scores for Haskins and Murray are off the charts, suggesting, all-pro type player. And obviously 1 year doing that should show that. These guys lit it up. And for me, I would be interested. If you tell me the Bengals drafted Kyler Murray, guess what? I'm going to be super excited because I think, man, they believe the height doesn't matter and that his talent is going to win out. And they're going to build an offense around Kyler Murray. That is extremely exciting. And I'd be more excited about him than any other quarterback in this draft. At the same time, I would have reservations of, well, what if they don't build it around him? Because the Bengals have a history of not really marrying coaching and personnel decisions. So I still, at the same time, have a lot of reservation about Murray, even though I would be extremely excited if my team took the plunge there.
I think that's one of the things for me when I'm looking at quarterbacks is how good of a fit are they with the coach? Because I think the melding of the scheme with the prospect is such an underrated quality to look at. You can look at a guy and they can have a big arm and fit it into tight windows and all those kind of things. But if, like you said, if they go to a West Coast offense where they have to throw all those little dink and dunk passes and they can't hit those ones with consistency, well, they're not going to work well there. And I just think that part of it and the evaluation of quarterbacks is where you need to have your front office and your coach really on the same page of saying, this is the type of quarterback I need, and making sure that's the kind of guy you go and get.
Yeah, I'm with that 100%. The marriage between personnel and coaching, when you see tenures fall or regimes fall in the NFL that you're like, okay, that guy's been there a while, or that GM's been there a while, or even if they haven't been, and they fail, and you'll always hear there was a disconnect between the scouting and the coaching. They would get a guy and they wouldn't know how to use him, or a coach wanted this guy and the GM drafted this guy instead. You hear about it all the time. And then the coach doesn't know how to use that guy. You can't have that. I think the best teams and the teams that seem to just churn out draft picks or low-end guys, undrafted guys, and always have they'll go from one quarterback to the next and still get production. The Bengals did that from Carson Palmer to Andy Dalton, and it's because they had the same guys in place in personnel and in coaching. I think there was a big contributor to that. And you'll see that mostly because of the continuity between the two, and you have to have that. So anytime there's a change in coaching or in personnel decisions, I get weary that maybe they won't hit it off right away, and you can end up really tanking a team for 2 or 3 years if you miss on that quarterback.
Yeah, for sure. That's a big thing. And speaking of quarterbacks, we got to wrap it up here with quarterbacks move it along. But another guy that you touched on, a guy that has 1 year of experience, but the numbers he put up, even with Ohio State's scheme being more of that quarterback power run, although they changed it to fit a little bit more of what Haskins does down the stretch, which obviously was good for them and good for him. But Haskins, of most people's quarterback one, I'm curious if he's your quarterback one. But there are some concerns. A lot of people, there's a lot of Bronco fans that are saying, anti-Lock, anti-Jones, anti-Murray. It's either go up for Haskins or nothing at all. But I don't think he's this slam dunk quarterback that many are trying to make him up to be.
I'd be just as scared of Haskins as I would be of Locke. And that doesn't mean that I don't like Haskins. I hope it didn't make it sound like I didn't like Locke either, because I'm intrigued by both. Haskins, I think once they married the system with him, and that happened midway, maybe 3/4 of the way through the season, and really finished strong, I thought he ran it to perfection. And a lot of crossing routes, a lot of timing stuff, a lot of levels, concepts. I mean, he was dynamite towards the end where he knew who to hit. Hi, Kitty. And then he knew where to go with the ball, and he was precise and accurate, and the timing was great. And when he was on and in the system, I thought, man, Haskins looks perfect. This is what you want from your franchise quarterback. And then you only got brief glimpses of him dealing with pressure or needing to go to the next read, or maybe the defense was giving him something he didn't expect. There's a string of games, and I want to say it's Michigan State, Nebraska, or Wisconsin. I can't remember which one it was, white and red team, but in Purdue, where it was very, very bad. I mean, the tape is not good for him there. And a lot of it is they're showing him one look and then giving him a different one post-snap. So they're changing pre-snap, post-snap look, making him hold the ball a little bit longer, move within the pocket, reset his feet, deal with pressure. And it was scary. And there was a lot of deep shots too, where he is not an accurate passer deep. Out of the top guys, he's the worst deep ball thrower out of the group. And he reminds me of Derek Carr, because I would say Derek Carr has a lot of the same issues that within the system, you want Derek Carr. When things aren't perfect and it starts to get a little weird and the defense starts to trick you a little bit, Derek Carr looks like a bad quarterback. He has issues when things change post-snap, pre-snap. He's not very good deep. He doesn't want to throw it deep. He doesn't push it deep. And I think Haskins has a lot of that in him. I would be concerned that what we see is what we're getting with Haskins. But at the same time, I made the same argument with Murray. Maybe he develops. Maybe because of only 1 year starting, there's a lot of untapped potential with him. The traits he shows that are scary look like natural, innate abilities, things you really can't control, but you maybe can develop them a little bit. So that's why I am concerned with Haskins. But again, I think if my team took him, I would be okay with it, because inside the system, and where are we in the NFL right now? We're watching Tom Brady versus Jared Goff. Those two within the system are perfect. They're exactly what you want. And I think Haskins can definitely be that. You just have to have a good system that protects him from getting outside of structure too often, where he turns into a pumpkin. And that's what scares me about top 10 with Haskins.
All right, well, going to put you on the clock here for the Broncos, the outsider perspective, but you're at the 10th overall pick and all of these guys are available. What one are you taking and which one do you think the Broncos would take?
I'll start with which one do I think they will, because just too many people are on this lock in Elway thing, and I think it makes sense. I think maybe Elway sees a little bit of lock in himself, and I can understand it. Man, people keep asking me too, for the Bengals fans, if the Bengals are taking a quarterback, it's got to be a franchise guy, right? They're just not going to take someone. Well, that should be the process all the time, I maintain. But at the same time, I don't know that I have a franchise label on any of these guys, because I would have concerns with all of them. But I could probably be convinced with all of the top four. If say you're the GM and the coach comes in and he goes, you know what, I really like this Kyler Murray. We're going to build around him, and I think we can develop him a little bit more. He's committed to football. We don't have to worry about that. And we're going to spread it out. We're going to have a fast offense. I'd be like, let's do it. Draft him. I'm ready to go. If you believe you can do it, let's do it. And then at the same time, if someone says, I know what Ohio State was doing, and I can keep Haskins within that system, I think we can work on him a little bit. I've got good quarterbacks coaches here that can really help him work his upper half and lower half to feel more comfortable when it's not joined together, and you got to create a little bit. And I think we can keep his accuracy up down the field with timing and a little bit of experience. I'd say, okay, I'm down with it. And if someone said to me about Drew Lock, we're going to sit him for a little bit. I'm going to work on his decision-making when things break down, try and corral him a little bit rather than opening up a Dwayne Haskins. I have to corral a Drew Lock. And that upside, that arm strength, that talent, that personality, I think we've got a potential Patrick Mahomes. I would say, I'm down. Let's do it. Because I can be convinced, honestly, with these guys. I'd probably have some more fight back with Daniel Jones if my coach is trying to convince me of him. But the top three guys, I'd be all for it. And I don't know which one I'd pick, to be honest with you. I'm not at that point right now where I would say give me him in January, early February, let's say, where I'm making a decision on which one of these guys is my guy. I think this would go down to the wire before I was convinced.
So you're probably there's also another contingent of those in Broncos country that are punt on quarterback for another year. I don't think it's going to happen, but punt on quarterback for another year and just take the BPA.
We get the same discussion in Cincinnati, and people say, well, look at the class. You can get Tua next year or Trevor Lawrence following year. Are you expecting to be 1-15 next year? Or are you expecting to give up 3 first-round picks? Because I feel the same way about the Broncos and Bengals. We're picking 10 and 11, right? So those teams were probably in 3 or 4 games. I'm just assuming with the Broncos where you lost by a touchdown and could have easily have won had your quarterback played better or other positions stayed healthy.
Or coaching staff been better.
Sure. Right. Very true. And so if that happens, you're not picking top 10 anymore, guys, and you're not drafting that quarterback. So if there's a guy here that you believe is that guy, and there may not be, you may go through this entire process and say, you know what, there isn't a guy here. But I don't like when fans say this is a bad quarterback class. You don't have to draft the whole class. You need to draft one guy that you can believe in. And go back to 2017. That was a poor quarterback class. We picked number 9 that year. We took John Ross over Patrick Mahomes. So waiting next year isn't always the best answer, and go with the player that, or fill a need that you believe is more pertinent to your roster in this year, because Trubisky, Mahomes, Watson, those guys went to the playoffs. One of them is the MVP. All 3 of those teams believe they got a franchise quarterback. So what was a bad class turned out to be very, very strong, and those guys went a lot higher than expected too. So I don't say this class is bad. Go through each individual player and see if you can find one that might be good, that you can convince yourself can be good in a year or two.
All right. Well, you heard that, guys, from Joe Goodberry's mouth to God's ears. Broncos probably looking at quarterback, and it sounds like, they punted last year on Josh Allen and Josh Rosen. I don't think it's going to happen again this year. Maybe they'll all be gone. Maybe the guy they like isn't there. That's possible, but I think if it comes down to it, Broncos end up taking a quarterback. But now we're going to kind of switch gears a little bit, moving on to, I think we're not, because we're already running a little long, we'll skip on the defensive line, and we're going to focus on something that both, I'm sure, the Bengals and the Broncos have been discussing a lot, and that is the off-ball linebacker position. Not those edge rushers, but those guys that play at that second level of the defense. This class, last year's class, absolutely phenomenal off-ball linebacker class. You got Roquan Smith, who looked incredible, Leighton Vander Esch. You got Rashaan Evans, who looked up and down a little bit, but still solid. And then you got guys like Fred Warner, Darius Leonard, who's probably going to win Defensive Rookie of the Year. If not him, it's Derwin. Yeah, so this season, not like last season, but last season, the top of the class was insane. But there are some talents at the top of this class that are in play for both the Broncos at 10, and if we don't take a linebacker there, the Bengals at 11, which I know that Bengal fans that I know are harping, for the linebacker from LSU. That's the guy they really want. At least a lot of them I've spoken with. So I'm curious about your take. Yeah, Devin White. He's a fun player. Good dude. He rides horses around campus. He'd be a perfect Bronco.
Bonus points. And he'd be perfect for being right outside Kentucky for the Bengals. So
yes, exactly.
Devin White is the guy, right? If everyone's looking at it and saying, okay, I want speed. I want some athleticism. I want somebody that looks comfortable in space. Even now that you're watching college football and you see sometimes there's only one linebacker out there, right? They'll go out there 3 or 4 D linemen, 1 linebacker, or 3 D linemen, 2 linebackers. It's just spread out. These guys got to be comfortable moving in space, attacking, playing the run, even though you're going to have to go face-to-face with some offensive linemen when you have a small front like that in college football. Devin White is all of that. And what you want, that speed, that closing speed, that burst, that aggressiveness downhill, man, he is your middle linebacker for the future. He looks all the bit of everything you need for a guy that is plug and play and going to rack up 150 tackles as a rookie. And I have no doubt in my mind he would do that. My concern with him is his over-aggressiveness, and maybe sometimes gets caught out of position because he comes downhill and he's ready to hit. I think he had 25 and a half tackles for a loss over the last 2 years. The guy is coming downhill, and it left him susceptible to play action, some coverage issues in zone coverage. I don't doubt his athleticism. And a lot of times if you're looking at linebackers, you say, well, at least first and foremost, I want an athlete for a guy in coverage. But a lot of these good cover linebackers aren't like A-plus athletes. It's the intelligence part of it that comes in. And I have no doubts that Devin White is smart, but the experience and the awareness and the understanding of how offenses are attacking you and trying to get you out of position, because that's where I think the league and football in general is heading. That's why we see the play action. That's why we see the fake jet motion sweeps and stuff behind you. It's because you're trying to move those linebackers out of the way and open up these passing lanes. And White's going to fall for it and go for it. And when he's right, he's going to crush that guy right at the line of scrimmage. When he's wrong, he's going to leave a void in the middle of the field. So I don't think he's quite Roquan Smith, but I definitely think he's better than Edmonds and Vander Esch, who went 16 and 19. So I believe White probably blows up the combine, and everyone's in the top 12 are going to say, do we want him? Because the question is going to be not how good is he. He's a blue chip prospect, I believe, as an off-the-ball linebacker. But they're going to question, what is the value of the off-the-ball linebacker? Is he still worth a top 12 pick in today's NFL? People are going to feel differently about it. I believe a lot of people still believe linebacker is the heart and soul of the defense. And when you have that guy in the middle of the field calling your defense and getting everyone lined up, the defense is better for it. And I would agree. But do you have to spend a top 15 premium pick to find that guy? When there are many examples of day 2 linebackers being tremendous players, and especially at middle linebacker. the best guy in the league right now is Bobby Wagner, and he was a second-round pick for the Seahawks. I believe if you look at the rest of this class, and there's a lot of guys I still have to get to, but just the next group behind him, we'll talk about Mack Wilson and Devin Bush. That's who I have next. When you see it, you say, okay, what's the gap between White and those guys? And I think there is a gap, maybe not significant enough for these teams that are picking top 12 to say, you know what, I think Devin Bush is probably there in round 2. I think he's probably in this a similar type of guy we want in the middle linebacker role, even though he's a poor man's version. And instead, I'll go with the defensive tackle in round 1. We're going to skip defensive tackle, like you said, and maybe you guys bring me on again. We'll talk about it because I think that's going to be the harder question of saying value versus position, and defensive tackle is probably worth much more to me than off the ball linebacker. So it's not going to be a question of White's ability and his transition and his fit, because I believe he's going to fit every team. It's going to be the question of value, and where do we value that position going forward in today's NFL?
Yeah, and that's something I know that we watching the Broncos play the Bengals this year, the speed and the athleticism on that second level of that Bengals defense was obviously missing, and that's something that Broncos bringing over Vic Fangio. His schemes, he did have Chris Borland in the 49ers, but his schemes that have evolved to really put a lot more of that coverage ionus, especially over the middle of the field, on the linebackers. So he's getting guys, obviously had Patrick Willis, who was a phenom in the 49ers, and then he's, Danny Trevathan and drafting Roquan Smith 8th overall last year. So it's going to be interesting, and I think that if the Broncos do not go quarterback with their first pick, it's either Devin White or one of those top 3 defensive tackles, because interior pass rush with edge rushers like Von Miller and Bradley Chubb that creates a backbone of a top 5 defense for the next 5 years. But yeah, no, I agree with you. And I'm curious about, if your elevator pitch, so to speak, on Mack Wilson, Devin Bush, as far as speed backers with some coverage ability and upside in that area that you don't have to maybe spend a top 10 pick on.
Yeah, and I think Mack Wilson for me is the next one, and he's the best cover guy of the top 3. And for me, I think it's definitely White, Wilson, and Bush for those top 3 guys. Wilson's the best guy in coverage. He had 6 interceptions in his career. He looks most comfortable. I believe when he came to Alabama, they weren't sure if he was really going to be a full-time linebacker or what type of linebacker he was going to be, because they brought him in like, this guy's an athlete, he's big. If we can get him to play the physical part the way we think and the mental part at linebacker that Nick Saban demands, he'll be all right. And he did, and he gained weight, and he's about 6'2", 240 now, maybe a hair underneath at 235, but the physical portion came on, and he's a big hitter because he's fast, and you know what I mean? It's like the Ant-Man effect where you're still bring a lot of power, because of the speed with him. He's not as stout of a run defender as I think White is, or I think Bush is, but I think Alabama's defense makes you that, and within that system, you're going to see him make a lot of run defense plays that maybe don't always translate. I mean, we've seen a lot of Alabama linebackers come out to varying degrees of success. I think he's more on the C.J. Mosley, definitely, than he is a Reggie Ragland or Rashaan Evans. I think he's better than Evans, and Evans went, 22 last year, so I could see Wilson going in the 15 to 25 range, and maybe just going a little bit higher than Evans did at 22. That would make sense to me, especially for today's NFL. And if he runs fast, people are saying 4.5s. If he does that, definitely, I think we're looking at a first-round pick. I think Bush is the guy that is going to measure under 6 foot and going to be the guy that looks bulkier and stockier and more of a run defending downhill type, but he looks comfortable in space also and made a lot of plays, especially I think there's a lot of plays where the quarterback's getting out of the pocket or the running back's getting, plays in the flats, and Bush surprisingly just flashes and chases that guy down and lays a hit and plays with high energy and good speed for a guy that's really got some great thickness to him as a run defender. And I think he probably goes top of the second round. And that's when I think the debate comes for White or Bush, because I'm with you guys. We pick 11th for the Bengals. If they don't take White or can't take White and come back in round 2 and take Bush, I'm not mad, because I think the value right there is tremendous. And I think you're getting a good player. I saw someone compare him to Eric Kendricks today. I think that makes a lot of sense too. I think they can be very similar. So you get an Eric Kendricks in round 2. That's ideal, I think, for the value of linebacker position in today's NFL. And there's some guys, there's a lot of intriguing guys. You mentioned Fred Warner, and a lot of people liked Warner last year, but there's going to be some mid-round guys this year that you're going to want to look at the testing. You're going to want to look at the production, the solo tackle shares, and if the production's there for those guys that test well, those are your mid-round targets. And it seems like every year that analytics portion for linebackers gets stronger with every draft class. If they have high solo tackle shares, you're going to want those guys. And so I'm waiting for those numbers. I think a lot of the analytics is still coming out. A lot of that data you're going to get and teams are going to get. Testing for me is huge. That's why I started watching quarterbacks this year, because front seven, I mean, most positions, but since we're talking about front seven, I believe in the testing numbers for those guys can help separate a lot of these. If let's say Devin White comes out and runs a 4.6, and you're like, man, it's definitely not a top 10 pick. But if he runs a 4.42, we're going to consider it harder. And it may be stupid to do that, but that's how you make sure you get a guy. Great example is John Ross, right? If John Ross doesn't run a 4.22, the Bengals aren't taking him at 9. And maybe they made a bad pick. Maybe they didn't. I think the jury's still out there. But point being is when a guy tests well, you're going to have to consider him a round earlier than you probably thought the film was. So if a guy like Devin Bush goes in and tears it up, he may not be there in the top of round 2. And if that's the case and you feel there's definitely a gap between these top 3 guys and the next group, then you may weigh heavier for Devin White at the top of round 1. And I can completely understand that.
Was there anybody at the Senior Bowl that really stuck out to you at that position?
Yeah, 2 guys that I circled a bunch of times, both on the North squad. Jermaine Pratt from North Carolina State, 6'3", 240, middle linebacker type. He was calling the plays in the huddle, which I always like to see. Physical. First time I noticed him is I hear like a crack of the pads, right? And these guys aren't hitting that hard during practice, not the first day. And I look and I see him walking back and he's amping everyone up. And I'm like, okay, this is the number 3 guy. And he comes out next play, takes on the fullback and levels him. And I'm like, all right, this guy's got some power to him and some thickness. All right, I like to see that, especially in practice. So 11 on 11, this guy's filling this hole and playing run defense at 100 miles an hour. I like that. So then you come back and they're releasing some data on practices, and he was the fastest guy on the team. And I said, what? Okay, so this guy's got speed running. I think I want to say 21 miles an hour. Plus he was physical downhill run stuffer. Let me go watch some film of Jermaine Pratt. And I haven't yet. So I have him circled. And that's the thing about the Senior Bowl, right? Guys are going to stand out to you. Let me go back and watch the tape. That's supposed to be the idea. So Pratt's one guy. I'm definitely, where is he projected to go? Because I have no idea. And then what does the rest of the tape look like? Because his practices were really, really high end. I mean, there was times we're sitting in the film room and there's scouts, coaches, personnel, and media people all watching this film. There's like 8 screens lined up, and we're all watching. And he's filling and making these run stops, and you hear the whole crowd like, "Ooh, oh!" It's just audible sounds when he was playing. And I think he's going to be a guy that, if his film looks good, man, I'm going to be in love with him later. But the other guy for me was Notre Dame. Probably more well-known, Drew Tranquill. He wore number 42 in the game. 6'2", 225, 230. Definitely was more of the athlete, outside linebacker type. Those two were paired together a lot. And he was flashing in terms of speed and diagnosing very, very quickly. A lot of times it looked like, is he unblocked on that play? Why did he get there so quickly? We'd rewind and we watched the play again. And no, he just beat the blocker to the point, or got to the gap before the running back did. And it really made me take notice because as an athlete in coverage too, you saw him move fluidly when covering tight ends and backs in the backfield, out of the backfield. And I thought, okay, here's a guy now that is really showing up more than I expected him to. And even though he had a lot of flash plays at Notre Dame, the thing for me though with him is he was almost too aggressive sometimes. And by day 3, they started doing a lot of trap and misdirection and counter runs, and he was getting out of position because of it. So I don't know if they figured out, okay, we're not getting a lot of these successful runs because Pratt's blowing up the fullback and Tranquill's coming underneath, beating the block and hitting our running back behind. We got to mix this up a little bit, and they did, and it worked. And it was getting Tranquill out of the way, and they really sprung some long runs, and it looked like he was searching for the ball or chasing ghosts a little bit. So now I'm going to go back and focus on him and see if more of that stuff does happen now that an NFL team, their own team, right, in practices, kind of exposed it a little bit. I want to see if college offenses did the same thing.
And the last 2 linebackers I wanted your quick take on from the Senior Bowl, 2 guys that got some hype that I didn't see one of them before coming in, but speed guys, physicality, Bobby Okereke from Stanford and Terrell Banks from, I believe it was New Mexico State.
Yeah, a lot of people were talking about Hanks, to be honest. And people were like, hey, how about this play here? And yeah, it looked good. He didn't stand out the way those other guys did and grab my attention. It took me going to focus on the film and watching him and really, when I say focus on a guy, you're just watching him in and out and replaying it and going over it. I thought Hanks looked good. He looked athletic. And for a guy that's 6'2", 230, he better look athletic because he didn't look as compact and as stout as like a Pratt did, and even maybe not as much as Tranquil did. But there wasn't that many specific plays where I could say, this is the one I'm going to show you where he's highlighting or he stood out. I just thought overall he was good and solid, and it sounded like the coaches liked him. So whatever was going on behind the scenes, and that's a lot of it that we don't ever get to see, right? Isn't that a big part of why we miss? And they'd come away and say, yeah, that guy, smart. He's into it. He's exactly what we want. And you just got to take their word for it because we don't ever get to see that or really get to experience it. And the other guy you said from Stanford, right? Yes. Yeah. His name he was mentioned a whole bunch, and it was more of the same thing. We didn't get to see the South the one practice when it got rained out really bad. So I missed a day of him and Hanks. But for the most part, again, I felt the same way as I did with Hanks, was good run defender in this case. But I wondered if – I remember seeing him a few times, and the running backs were beating him in coverage and made me want to go back and see him more in coverage. And I don't have more than that to go off of because I haven't watched his tape yet. All
right. Well, that's going to wrap up this episode of Building the Broncos. You can find Carl on Twitter at Carl Dumler MHH and myself at Nick Kendell MHH. And also, please make sure you go and follow Joe Goodberry at Joe Goodberry. And thank you very much for coming on today. I know that it was a back and forth. I know you got vacation coming up as well. Hopefully you can vacate the north for a little bit. I know you're just down in Mobile, but maybe go enjoy some Florida or something. Where are you?
Orlando. Yeah, Orlando. We're going to Universal Studios.
That'll be awesome. Man, I'm jealous.
Never been there. You guys been there?
I have. It's fun. It's I went there with the orchestra trip when I was in high school. So
cool.
It was a good time. Yeah, no, definitely very jealous because, like I said, it's going to be negative 48 wind chill here tomorrow. So pray I don't die. Also, you listeners, make sure you head on over to Mile High Huddle, an affiliate of 24/7 Sports and CBS Sports Digital, to find our content covering the Denver Broncos. Head on over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating and comment. Your support can help us continue to bring you our Denver Bronco deep dives. You can follow the Building the Broncos podcast and all our other great audio content by subscribing to the Huddle Up podcast on iTunes and for Android users, Stitcher, as well as check us out on YouTube. You can follow us on Twitter at Mile High Huddle and at BTB Football Pod. For Carl Dumler, Joe Goodberry, and Nick Kendell, I'm wrapping up another episode of Building the Broncos podcast. We hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you next week. Go Broncos.
You've been listening to Building the Broncos. Join Broncos Country's deep divers at milehighhuddle.com to keep the conversation going.